Love matters. Love matters. Love matters. Love matters with Evelyn Sharma.
Hey guys, this is Evelyn Sharma, and you're listening to Love Matters, my new podcast in collaboration with Indian Express and DW, Germany's international broadcaster. This podcast is all about relationship topics that matter to you and me. In every episode, we'll hear from a listener with a challenge in matters of love, and we'll have amazing guests on who can talk to the issue from their own experience. Today's topic is a rather touchy one. Can we talk about sex openly, please? I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been frustrated with this topic. But here, love matters, and so does the act of lovemaking. Our guest today is Leeza Mangaldas, a sex positivity content creator and educator. Leeza is very popular on YouTube and Instagram, and I'm sure you guys have checked her out already. Her topics are everything from safe sex to consent to female pleasure. And her aim is to normalize openly talking about sex. Welcome to the show, Leeza. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Evelyn. It's so good to be talking to you.
Before we start and get into our conversation, we'll hear from a listener with a real-life problem. This time we hear from a young listener in Bangalore who wants to be more open about sex. I'll play some snippets from a conversation that we recorded before the show. And in the first one, she talks about a very awkward moment recently with her mom. Let's have a listen.
Hey Evelyn, I'm a 24-year-old female calling from Bangalore. I wanted to share an experience. My mom found an emergency morning pill in my bag and confronted me about it. And in a haste, I just told her that it was a prank that someone played on me. She never really pushed for it. She never asked me any more follow up questions, but I really, really wish that she had. I wish all parents would talk openly about sex with their kids.
Listening to her voice note, Leeza, what advice do you have for her? And tell us about your life. Were you able to talk openly about sex with your parents?
I feel very lucky to have had extremely open and sort of non-judging parents. They were never discouraging of any sort of question or curiosity, so it always felt safe to ask if we had a question. And I was a very nerdy kid. I loved reading. When we were little, we had these like childcraft encyclopedia series, kind of like a really good textbook, at least for the time. They probably seem so dated now, but this was in the 90s. So I definitely think I saw really beautiful illustrations of like various types of processes in the natural world. Even flowers technically reproduce sexually, right? So that was also something that we could talk about. My parents talked about contraception, talked about consent, and things like that. I feel really lucky to have had a really supportive environment.
Yeah, I think that is very lucky, especially when it comes to Indian families. Usually we're a little bit more conservative and shy to talk about the topic. And, maybe on your wedding night, we'll have a little chat. Just like our listener who's struggling to talk openly with her mom. Do you have a bit of advice for her? Do you have a tip of, from the other side, basically, if you don't have such open parents?
I think that's a hard one. I mean, it sometimes can even come with really scary consequences for young people, especially in our cultural context where like parents might punish you, if they find out that you're sexually active, or especially as a young woman. It's really sad. But I do think that sometimes easing into the conversation, maybe you're watching a show together like Sex Education on Netflix or Sex Explained or something, which allows for like a neutral third party to be bringing up these topics. And instead of turning the TV off, you watch it together and maybe talk about it after. Maybe that can ease some of the pressure instead of being like, talking about your sex life and having your parents potentially punish you. But I do hope that our generation and younger generations, and I mean, anyone who hasn't yet had a child, can think about how we don't want to perpetuate this.
You have decided to become a sex positivity influencer. And I want to know a little bit more about the professional side of it. Where did it start where you said, hey, I want to know a lot more about this topic and I actually want to become an educator?
When I was in college, and I was fortunate to get a scholarship to Columbia University in New York City. And another thing I did while I was there was I was an RA, which is like, you're in charge of a residence hall, your a resident advisor, where you're looking after the kind of general well-being of the students on a floor in a hall. And so part of what we had to do was like consent training workshops where we talk about consent. And like I had a bag of condoms on my door so students had easy access to protection and things like that. And I myself was like 18 or 19 years old, right? And I felt so lucky to be able to come of age and have my first sexual experiences in this environment that was really sex positive, and where people were having these conversations, where the college itself was taking the initiative to try and, I mean, so much more can be done. I really think sex education globally is lacking. It's not just an India problem. And I even think within the US, I mean, little pockets like New York City or San Francisco or something are very progressive about these things. But if you look at the abortion laws and, I mean, the state of affairs on many sex related things, whether it's, rights for the LGBTQ plus community, or abortion, or laws against trans identity and things like that. I mean, the US is, for a developing country, it's really quite shocking where they are. But so I don't want to say, oh, the West is better and India is not good. That's not how it is. I think this is a global problem. Like, it's quite a sex negative world.
I was pretty shocked when I came to India, and I came actually from a very conservative church background. And I came to India, and everything was actually about sex. I felt like, every poster for a movie is oozing sexual energy. Every song is about some sort of sexual act, but then no one really talks about it.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of interesting points. And I think it's like worth thinking about the fact that female sexuality and women's sexuality is typically utilized in advertising, marketing, and entertainment to sell everything from movies to cars to, I mean, alcohol, you name it. Like, the media is so ready to sexualize women, but society doesn't like to allow women any sexual agency. You're like a product to be consumed by the viewer, but you're not allowed to actually talk about, celebrate, or do anything yourself. You know what I mean? It's like packaged for the male gaze by men for male consumption. We're all part of this conditioning.
But I wanted to know, what exactly do you mean when you say sex positivity, or when you say we live in a sex negative world? I mean, different people use different words. So I just want your definition on it.
Sex positivity for me is like a judgment-free attitude to sex. Sex positivity doesn't mean you have to go have lots of sex. You can be asexual and still be sex positive. And you can have had many partners and still be sex negative. It isn't about necessarily having lots of sex, but rather not judging other people's sexual choices, not seeing sex as this bad, wrong, shameful thing, instead seeing it as a potential source of joy and wonder, and like a positive thing, basically.
Leeza, you bring up a lot of interesting points when you say that, we are so conditioned by the information that we get. And we have actually a second part from the conversation with our listener. She has a couple of problems with information as well. Let's listen to her again.
I had to do all of my research, and the internet is just so huge in terms of the information it has. So, how does one filter the information? What sources are good? What sources are bad? How does one know?
That is such a good question. And I think a lot of our listeners are really interested in the answer. Leeza, do you have any advice for our listeners? Do you have any tips for good resources?
I think it's so important to be discerning as somebody looking for an answer on the internet. It's so important to try and seek out sources that are credible and that are scientifically accurate and judgment free when you're looking for information about your sexual health or something like that. But I also think it really is worth, if you have a concern that's actually manifested already, if you have an actual medical thing happening to you, instead of trying to self cure it, I think if you have access to a good doctor, I mean, I think one of the most valuable relationships in my own life is with my gynecologist. And it took a long time to find one that I could trust, and one that I felt comfortable with, and one who I felt was really non-judging. And I'm sad that it can be a bit of a process to find that, but I think it's well worth the effort, because when you are trying to figure out, something like what contraception is best for you, if you want to move beyond condoms to something else,
Yeah.
or if you just have a vaginal infection, or I don't know, whatever other concern,
Yeah.
to be able to go to a doctor and get expert advice, I think is something that I wish everybody had the privilege of doing.
Right.
Sometimes a WebMD or some sort of internet-based self-diagnosis isn't always accurate, and so I understand in some cases people just don't have access to a doctor or gynecologist, and so they have no choice. But if you do have the choice, and if you do have the luxury of accessing a good doctor, I think it's also really a relationship worth cultivating.
Yeah. What kind of problems do you feel can the lack of right information lead to?
Let's take, for example, the very prevalent misunderstandings around virginity and the hymen, and the complete misunderstanding of the anatomy of the hymen has been used to perpetuate so much violence in this regard. In several cultures, if the woman doesn't bleed on her wedding night, she can be killed or abandoned, or all kinds of awful ways of ostracizing her,
Right.
end up taking place, when actually, firstly, it shouldn't even matter whether somebody has had sex or not.
Right.
That is the premise of this is already flawed, but there's also a complete misunderstanding of the anatomy of the hymen. It is not necessary for all people who've not had penetrative intercourse before to bleed the first time they do. The hymen is a stretchy tissue. It's not a wall that just, seals your vaginal opening. Otherwise even period blood wouldn't be able to come through, right?
I think, a lot of women are scared of this pain also that they associate with having sex. But you have a wonderful YouTube channel and, of course, your Instagram that I follow now too. And you put up a lot of content to educate, and you get a lot of questions, I'm sure, too. What are the most common concerns that people have?
You mentioned pain during sex. I think a lot of people do have that questions around first sexual experiences and whether they will hurt. I think, again, there's this misinformation around how sex just is painful for women, and so often it's actually a lack of sufficient foreplay and lack of sufficient lubrication that leads to pain during sex, rather than something that's inherently just the way things are for women. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like women's pleasure is insufficiently prioritized, and they've kind of made to feel like pain is just par for the course. But that's a completely misconstrued kind of take on things. Sex can be very pleasurable for people regardless of what sort of body or gender or whatever they have. And I also think there's a lot of questions around how sex can be more pleasurable. People are so curious about orgasms. How do I orgasm? So many people, women particularly, say they've never had an orgasm and wonder why that is. We don't talk enough about the clitoris. A lot of people also want to know more about masturbation and whether it's okay to masturbate. There's a lot of shame, I think, still, but people are recognizing that this thing that feels good and makes them less stressed out and sleep better and also helps to get you to know your own body better. Surely it can't be a bad thing. So there's a lot of curiosity around that.
Right. So on your YouTube channel, you...
Love matters.
Oh, that is the sound for our quiz. Every episode, our producers prepare a little quiz for us, for me and the guest to guess away and test our knowledge on the topic. This is the sound when we guess right. And this is the sound when we guess wrong. So since it's a surprise quiz, our producer is going to send me the question on my phone and we'll have to guess. Today's quiz is a true or false quiz about sex myth with 3 questions. First question, true or false? Leeza, we have to get this together. Pulling out before ejaculation is safe.
False.
False. I think so too. Let's hear it. Yay! Why is it false?
The withdrawal method is something that a lot of people rely on in the absence of condoms. So, we've got to address it, Also, it's hard to control when exactly you ejaculate. So while someone can try and convince you of their willpower, there's still a lot of trust involved in terms of you hoping they won't actually ejaculate and they hoping they won't actually ejaculate. And so why would you take this big risk when there is much, much more reliable. I mean, contraceptive methods available, whether it's condoms or pills or IUDs or whatever it is that might be right for you if you've both been tested for STDs, etc. For me, it's just not worth the risk. Why? It's not a reliable method.
That's right. Here, I have the answer here for us. It's false. Pulling out isn't a very reliable way to prevent pregnancy. A barrier method like a condom is better. Plus, it doesn't prevent sexually transmitted diseases. Here's our next question. True or false? The clitoris is a little nub on the outside of the vulva.
False, in the sense that it's not only the little nub, it also extends internally, and the bulk of the clitoral body is actually beneath the surface, as it were.
Okay, well, false. False. It's actually a large internal organ comprised of erectile tissue that's similar in scale to the penis.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there you go. Learn something new.
You see the external bit, but there's a lot that you don't see that's beneath it. It's actually a very beautiful shape, the clitoris. You should look up a picture. It's not what you think it. I mean, many people are surprised to see that and don't realize it extends internally. So the P-shaped button is the tip of the iceberg.
Alrighty, third question. True or false? Women always achieve orgasm during sex.
False.
False. I think so too. Yeah, there you go.
That's a very easy false for us, I feel. Because even if just you and me don't always orgasm during sex, that statement is false. So it's false. And unfortunately, particularly for women, orgasm during penetrative sex is not as frequent as we might imagine or desire.
That's right. So here's the answer, false. In an Indian online study from 2020, the majority of men reportedly say they always orgasm during sex, but only 30% of women. Well, our listener actually has a bit of a problem with her boyfriend on this topic. And that's why I'd like us to listen to a third snippet of the conversation with her before we continue.
My boyfriend, he really cares about me having a good time in bed. So he thinks that I'm not having as good a time as he is. How do I convince him that I'm having an equally good time as he is in a way that doesn't make him feel that I'm just saying it for the sake of it?
Leeza, what would you say to our listener?
So I haven't gotten to talk to the listener myself, so I'm making some assumptions here, but I think what I'm hearing is that for many heterosexual women, penetrative sex doesn't always result in orgasm, and yet it can feel nice and you're not having a bad time. I mean, sex doesn't have to end in orgasm to feel good, but also a lot of the things we learn in heterosexual relationships about what heterosexual sex is like are so penetration centered. Like when we say the word sex, we think penis in vagina, but sex doesn't have to be. Sex is so much more than penetration. And I mean, often in heterosexual sex, the clitoris, which is a much more reliable route to orgasm, is entirely ignored. Most women, or rather most people with vulvas, do require some amount of clitoral stimulation to experience orgasm. Penetration alone isn't enough. And so I feel like two things. One, it's nice to be able to communicate with your partner about what turns you on and what feels really good, because it's different for different people. And ultimately, only you are the expert on your pleasure. But also, sex doesn't always have to end in orgasm to be great. Like instead of focusing on, am I going to have an orgasm? It's nice to sort of be present in the moment and take some of the pressure off. So, you aren't seeing it as this goal oriented thing, but rather enjoying things as they take place.
Yeah. So coming back to our listener and stepping into her shoes, if that was your partner, how would you, approach him to talk about this topic?
Well, I wasn't able to quite understand why he didn't think that she was having a good time. But I think talking about sex, and not just while you're having sex, but like even in non-sexual situations, so that there isn't any pressure. Often when you talk about sex or try and give feedback or direction, if you haven't done that before and it's the first time you're saying something, it can be kind of intimidating to the partner, or they take it personally or feel like they're not good enough or something. I feel like being able to comfortably talk about sex, it really increases your sense of connection and honesty with each other, and being able to communicate with each other about your pleasure and what feels good and what doesn't, I think can really also really make the sex better.
Yeah, I guess it's more about sharing, what you would like rather than telling the other person what they're supposed to do.
I feel like instead of thinking about the shoulds and the woulds and the like scripts that have already been set by, I don't know, porn and the patriarchy and various other things, it's nice to like discover your own genuine kind of relationship to pleasure
Yeah.
together, instead of it being like, I should have a big dick and I should orgasm and I should, you know what I mean? Like, forget the shoulds and just focus on what is.
Right. Well, in your line of work, I'm sure you faced judgment or difficulties, especially talking so openly about sex in India. Do you want to share a couple of difficulties with us and how you tackled them?
For the most part, actually, I feel like the response to my content has been really positive. Like, most people seem genuinely interested and genuinely just happy that somebody is talking about it. I mean, on occasion, there'll be someone, I guess, mainly heterosexual man who who would slut shame you or say something like, you know, only sluts talk about sex or something like that. But I mean, I feel like the word slut has long been reclaimed and people are free to call me a slut if they want. But I mean, if that's really your best argument about why I shouldn't be talking about sex, it's you with the problem, not me. But actually, my project is not so much about me as it is about starting these conversations and encouraging more people to have them. So that's my goal. And I think already I see that. Like, already there's more people even on the internet talking more freely. People write to me being like, I talked to my kid about sex thanks to the video I saw about the importance of talking to your parents about sex. Or I talked to my boyfriend about my pleasure because I saw your video about whatever, the clitoris and the misunderstanding of the G spot and things like that. So I feel like if it's okay to talk about this openly, then that's really what I'm here to do.
I've learned a lot today. I have learned a lot and I have really enjoyed our conversation. And I love that your goal is to actually have everyone talk about sex more openly. So, yes, thank you for the wonderful work that you do, Leeza. And thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me, Evelyn. It was lovely talking to you.
And thank you to our listener for sending in her question and being vulnerable about her problems in the matter of love. And I really hope that, you will have a more open conversation with your parents as well as your boyfriend about all matters of physical intimacy and sex and pleasure. And I hope that, our conversation with Leeza today helped you to find the right words. And that's it for today. If you have a question in matters of love, please write us at lovematters@dw.com. Maybe your question will be featured in a future episode. Anyway, we would love to hear from you. In our next episode, our listener struggles with feelings of shame around his sexuality and really wants to find love through a traditional movie meet cute. I'll be speaking to drag artist and LGBTQ+ activist Shashank about his journey of self-acceptance. And Shashank has some beautiful advice for our listener. Until next time, this is Evelyn Sharma, and I think love matters.
Love matters.